I've talked in my last video and this, and I hope one more, about evergreen washing as I see it. The process of ignoring the importance of the longing for enduring, refreshed beauty and youth in this case, examining a movie, a story. When the idea that there's this land of eternal youth that's just out of sight, beyond, but people know about it, don't quite know how to reach it, exists, and that is the way that affects how people act, and you don't examine that, then you don't know very much what the movie's about. And this, I think, is the case with the movie Gone with the Wind. The very idea of something being gone with the wind, as I see it, is linked to Celtic mythology, where you would go through a mist to get to the other world, the world just out of sight that had to be reached by magic. Also in Arthurian myths, like the mists of Avalon. So in the Arthurian legends, it's a factor as well. So what happens when the wind blows is that it'll disperse the mist, and you'll be left without your passageway to the other realm that's just out of sight. The idea of something being evergreen comes up in the movie as well, and this is a symbol of endurance, renewal, which in part Scarlett symbolizes. She is loved by Melanie and Ashley because she represents what they don't have: strength, endurance, life. Melanie says she's full of life, and Ashley says she has a passion for living. So they love her for what they don't have, and they cut her a lot of slack, to say the least, because of that. And to some extent, the whole society is people who are dedicated to the preservation of beauty and a sense of youth at any cost. Scarlett, after the war, rebuilds her fortunes because of evergreen trees, Georgia pine. She marries a man she doesn't love and takes over his lumbering aspect of his business and builds it up substantially after the tree catastrophe of the burning of Atlanta. So this evergreenness plays a big part in the rebuilding of her fortunes and allowing her to be evergreen in the sense that she can at least get back the apparent glory of her plantation. It is also part of a song that plays at strange times in the movie. After her first husband, Melanie's brother, has died, and this, by the way, violates one of the horror movie conventions. It's the subject of an ongoing joke in the genre that the brother always dies first. Brother in this sense referring to someone of African ancestry. But the irony in Gone with the Wind that a brother is that a brother does die first, but it's a brother who's a brother of one of the main characters, Melanie, and they are of European ancestry. So in that way, there isn't that sort of discrimination in the movie. In fact, the slaves around Scarlett, official slaves, people of African ancestry, who have that legal status that's recognized, don't die in the movie. They survive. When all around Scarlett, there's a very high mortality rate. She loses both of her parents, two of her husbands, and her daughter. And Rhett leaves her, so that's a different sort of loss. 12 Oaks is the name of the neighboring plantation where Ashley, her love interest for much of the film, lives. And that is a tree, the oak, that was sacred to the Celts and the Druids. It was very important in their rituals. And Tara, strangely enough, I tried to look up in a search to see what its meaning was in Gone with the Wind, and the first thing I found was that it's a name for star, a Hindu goddess who's associated with a star, and who was fought over in a massive, costly war. So that does apply in some way to Scarlett, because she is someone that men go and fight over. after the war, and that costs her the death of her second husband. But there's also a Buddhist goddess as well. But Tara is most prominently, I would think, in a movie where the Irish ancestry of Scarlett is emphasized, a place in Celtic and Irish mythology. It's a hill that's referred to as Tara even today, where the kings of Ireland were supposed to have lived and been buried, I believe. And it's also a site in Celtic myth about the invasions of Ireland, where the people, the sons of Milesians, I think they're called, want to come to the Tuatha De Danann, which is probably not the correct pronunciation. There are several pronunciations. And just tell them how they admire their society. And the Tuatha De Danann don't believe them, think they're invaders, and attack them. And eventually lose that war and retreat into the hills, forests, and streams of Ireland by cloaking themselves in mist, in a manner of speaking, making themselves invisible. So Scarlett's people are, in a way, the ones who lose in the war. But Scarlett does not take the same path as in the Irish mythology in one respect, because she fights on, becomes like the invaders, beats them at their own game, and retains her ties to the land and to her family estate. Whereas the Tuatha De Danann retreated and became invisible. And that, in a way, is symbolized in that much of her family disappears, and while she remains. And her great nightmare that she confides to Rhett is that she's looking for something. She's tired and hungry and so on. And she has the feeling that she's something she can't find, and it's in the mist, which is the gateway to the other world, or finding the Fae, if the Tuatha De Danann have become the Fae, the fairy people. So she has this nightmare of being unable to find them. She has diverged in that one sense from part of the myth, in that she's now cut off from part of her ancestry and her people. But she becomes much tougher and fights, and in that respect is conceived to have won a victory that her ancestors didn't. Now what changes this is that her father talks to her about her ties to the land, and this is a big factor in much of Celtic mythology. There is one man who does make it to the mythical land to the west of Ireland. Sometimes you have to go through a mist to get there in some versions. And he gets there and marries a woman from the magical land of Tirnanog and stays there for several years. But he is nostalgic for Ireland, misses it. And his wife, with great reluctance, gives him a magical horse to allow him to go back and revisit his old land. And the trouble is, he's told not to touch the land while he's there, and this relates to the way Scarlett's father talks, and Rhett talks about Scarlett. In here, he says, you draw your strength from the land, the dirt of Tara. So when Oisin, if that's the pronunciation, goes back to his native Ireland, he finds that a lot of time has gone by. The people don't look as big as they used to. They can't accomplish such heroic things anymore. It's quite sad compared to the glory of his former days. And he either wants to have a handful of soil, or he helps someone lift a rock that's sitting on the ground. And he thinks he can do it without getting off his horse, but for one reason or another, the strap breaks or he falls off. He touches the ground, and when he touches the ground, he instantly ages, and all the years that he would have aged in the normal world, and dies. So this is a representation that is alluded to, I think, in the movie, in that both Scarlett's father and Scarlett's daughter die when they fall off their horses while attempting a jump, as if like attempting magical flight, or a ride on a magical horse. So there's this tie to the land that pulls them back, and eventually destroys them. There is a tendency of the other characters to view Scarlett in this idealized way, at least Melanie and Ashley do. And she is like their other world, their other realm of eternal youth and beauty. So they give a lot to allow her to continue on as she is. Melanie says that children are life renewing itself, and to see life renewing itself, to see evergreenness, is what she will risk anything for. She says it's worth, danger is not that important when you see life renewing itself. But there's also a sort of slavery in this. There is a movie about 5 years before with the same actor, Leslie Howard, playing a role of someone who is psychologically enslaved to someone else. And she, in turn, is psychologically enslaved to another person. And it's called Of Human Bondage, meaning slavery in that context. So that these are not just regular people who would otherwise be of similar social status and economic status, but they form these bonds that make them accept a certain amount of abuse and financial exploitation from the person who plays the master role in the relationship. And this is something also that you see throughout Gone with the Wind, and I think is meant to be alluded to by using the same actor from that movie about psychological slavery in basic relationships. Scarlett's admirers are essentially her slaves. They will do anything for her. Her first husband, Melanie's brother, proposes to her at the drop of a hat and will do anything, as many other people will, to help her, or just to be admired or have her attention for a short span of time. And the other men are slaves in a way to their ideal of fulfilling vision of youth and beauty. When they behave foolishly and go off to the war, that Rhett tells them they really don't have the equipment to win, they're still part of this ideal that they want to promote, and that has a horrible cost to it. But the officially legalized African ancestry slaves act the same way as the people of European ancestry. There are various people who seem to serve Scarlett no matter what. And I think it is important to look at all the aspects of slavery in the film, and not just the one. So there is a time with the evergreen song, the song O Christmas Tree, or O Tannenbaum, originally about a contrast between the faithfulness of a tree and the unfaithfulness of a woman, which could apply to Scarlett because she marries two men she doesn't love. And that is alluded to when Scarlett goes to Atlanta in mourning after the death of her first husband, for whom Melanie is also mourning, because that was her brother. And they go to an auction to raise money for the war. And Rhett sees Scarlett there. She's not allowed to dance because she's in mourning. And just before he makes his fantastically expensive bid to win the right to dance with her, he comes and visits her at the booth. And when he does, this song, O Christmas Tree, plays. So there's this contrast on one hand between this yearning for something that beautiful that will last and the death that's in her life. This gets even more explicit later on when Scarlett is about to try to find a doctor for Melanie, about to give birth in the midst of all this carnage, and walks across a railway yard that's full of wounded, dying men as far as the eye can see. And one of the bits of music in the montage between Dixie and Swanee River is a replaying of a few notes of this same song, O Christmas Tree. The very meaning of what people pursue in the film is often clouded, misted over, and they find that they've been pursuing symbols the whole time. And this is the basis of Scarlett's inability to admit her love for Rhett, according to what she finally says when she says she loves him at the end of the movie. And he goes off into the mist. We don't really know, maybe none of us know, if we really love land. They say that Scarlett loves the land more than anything else, but is that just a love of agelessness that's projected onto the land? That if we had a means of staying young, then would we look at land the same way? Would we look at love or fame or money or many of the other things that Scarlett pursues in the same way? Perhaps that's why people don't look at the role of the dream of being young in these movies, because there's not a lot of frame of reference for it. It would totally change the way you look at everything, and it's a little bit much to take in all at once. But nevertheless, I think we have to make some effort to understand movies like Gone with the Wind, when the very essence of the title is about the loss of this mist, this imaginary link to a world of eternal youth.